Welcome again to your revisions for principles of management. But again, management simply means the art of getting things done through others. I'd like to continue with the questions. I sent you one question the last time. It was a brief question. Hope today I can do two questions so that we can move on like that. So the second question in your paper states, Mapopwe Enterprises operates successfully as a sole trader and the owner has a plan of turning the business into a limited company, or in other words, the owner has got plans to incorporate his business or her business. We are required as business consultants to advise the owner on the benefits of implementing the plan, the benefits of transitioning from sole trading to limited liability companies. So I'll discuss this with you. And of course, I've got headings before me. I'll try to explain every heading, every brief sentence I have, and then we can always ask questions. So the first advantage of incorporation, the act of transforming a sole trading or a partnership business into a limited liability company business, is limited liability for the shareholders. Now, the concept of limited liability suggests that if the business was to be shut down, if the business was to be said to be illiquid, or the business became inoperative, we can use that word, then it means that the shareholders would only lose up to the value of capital plus the profits that they have earned on the investments. So they wouldn't lose personal assets, but they would simply lose the value of their shares as well as the profit they have generated on those shares. I hope that you can see that as an advantage. And it is because of the concept of limited liability we have seen, increased investment in different markets, because now shareholders do not sign at their own risk when they join a company. The maximum they can lose is the contributed share capital. The second point is limited liability companies tend to be more stable compared to sole trading or partnership businesses. They tend to be more stable because these entities normally incorporate or adopt systems, which makes it a bit difficult for the business to fail. All right, so these are more stable, and one of the testaments to that is that if you're a limited liability company and you go to the bank to ask for a loan, the bank is going to give you something more compared to what they would give a sole trader. Then there's an aspect of separate legal identity. This simply means that the firm now is legally distinct from the owner, and firm can now sue and be sued in its own right. Every time you're dealing with a limited liability company, you need to know that you're doing so at your own risk, because if the company fails to meet its obligations, you cannot go and trouble the owners, because they enjoy what we call separate legal identity. Yeah, hope that you can see that. Separate legal identity. You only sue the company in that case. Then there is what we call wider access to capital. Of course, if we incorporate, we'll get rid of the problem of restricted access to capital. If the bank cannot lend us some money, we can always offload shares on the market. Particularly if you're a public limited liability company, that becomes easy to do. You can offload shares and bail yourselves out of, let's say, liquidity challenges, or you can even raise money for investments. if you have got wider access to capital. Then there is an aspect of economies of scale. So again, economies of scale simply means that the more activities we do, the cheaper it is for us. If you look at a company like ShopRite has got so many outlets in this nation of Zambia, and they could take advantage of that, because if they, let's say, want to run an advert, that advert would cover all their outlets, as long as they have got what we call uniform pricing in their outlets. I hope that you can see that these are the advantages of incorporation, and for every point you needed to explain so that you can get your 10 marks. The next question says, one of the features that part B, one of the features that affect the effectiveness of the organizational structure, achieve organization goals, is the span of control. So required. Give 5 factors that should be considered when determining the width of the span of control. Now, span of control simply means the number of subordinates that report to a particular superior. The number of subordinates who report to a particular superior. So the question is, give 5 factors that should be considered when determining that number. All right? So let us go there, try to see what we can do with that. Determinants of span of control include, number 1, the scope and nature of work. Yes. If the scope of work is wide, the nature of work, of course, is tedious, might want to work with more subordinates. Yes. Then there is also what we call management time. Okay. A manager who has got more time may need less subordinates, but if a manager has got less time on his hands, he may need more helping hands. The next point is management quality. Again, it is believed that a skilled manager may work with a few group, may be able, not necessarily that, but a skilled manager can be able to manage a good number of subordinates. But a manager who is not skilled may just be assigned a small number of subordinates. Then we also have got what we call subordinates quality. I think I remember, if you are working with skilled subordinates, you may need less of them. But if you're working with unskilled subordinates, you may need more of them. All right. And then finally, there's physical location. All right. Some jobs may require your physical presence. Okay. Some jobs may require physical presence. If a job requires your physical presence, you may need less subordination. But if you depend on subordinates to effect your job who are somewhere else, you may need more helping hands. Hope that that is clear. And I want to ask for you to come up with questions. All right, the next discourse, or the next part of the question says, explain the concept of management by objectives. State the benefits to both the employee and the employer of these MBOs. So this falling under Peter Drucker, one of the management gurus. Management by objectives. He argues that the management system must be a win-win situation where the company gets value out of their management team. MBO is a style of management system that attempts to relate organizational goals to individual performance and development through the involvement of all-level management and organizational behavior. So the principles of MBOs include, number 1, we need to set objectives and targets. Every manager must have a standard, a target, which they should aim to meet. And of course, targets or objectives must be realistic. The second point is that there is need for the development of action plans. Again, don't just set objectives, come up with plans of how you're going to meet those objectives. Okay, come up with the how. You see, an objective is the what you want, aspect of what you want to achieve, and then the plan is how you're going to achieve whatever you have set for yourself as a standard. For instance, if we're going to drive up the value of sales, the objective is to drive up this value of sales. Perhaps one of the plans would be we need to increase or diversify our customer base, or we need to reach out to those customers who may not afford to buy in bulk, or those customers who may buy in bulk depending on what the need is. Then there is need for continuous review of the system. Now, continuous review of the system involves comparing what you plan, comparing what you planned against what you are actually doing. So comparing expected results against actual results. All right. So we need to ensure that we don't deviate from the initial plans. Yes, and then lastly, we have got performance appraisal. Now, performance appraisal, of course, simply means the assessment, the objective assessment of one's work. And I think that was the first question. A performance appraisal is undertaken in order to give feedback to the employee so that they may know whether they are meeting the requirements of a particular job or not. All right. Are there benefits to the employee for MBOs? I think we should have those. Number one, MBOs highlight employee training needs. Again, if we have good objectives and those objectives are not being achieved, we may have to take our employees for further training so that they can meet the demand of their jobs. MBOs promotes communication between employee and employer. That's still all right. Okay, so in the assessment, in the appraisal assessment, you give feedback to your employee on where they can improve, and so as they respond to your questions and to your concerns, there's communication that is taking place, and hopefully that communication can result in some solution that would help the company to move forward. Next, employee participation can improve motivation. Well, again, in MBOs, when we have an idea, we need to communicate to employees for buy-in, and if employees participate, they'll feel important. Then the next point says MBOs encourages team building by integrating employees and organization interest. So again, here we meet on common ground. We have consensus. It's a win-win situation again. The employee wants, of course, to have the best, benefits possible out of a given company, but the company needs also to get the best out of their employees. It should be a win-win situation. And so that is the point that you have there, the last point. All right, so unless you've got questions on this, you can always communicate if you have some. I know that the technique in management is simply to be able to highlight a point and be able to explain it. If you can do that, then you are on your way to prosperity, wealth, and happiness. I want to close with that last question, that question 3, and I'll continue later on with the other question. We have got what we call change in an organization. Question 3 says, change in an organization is inevitable, meaning that we can't avoid change, we should just manage it. And if management does not respond to change, the consequences can be devastating. Organizational change may be triggered by either internal or external factors. Internal factors are those factors that are within our control. External factors are those factors outside of our control. Then the question says, contrast between planned and unplanned change. And then it goes further to say, identify and explain the external factors that trigger change in the organization. And then finally, there's the issue of parastatus. But let me start with the first one, contrast between planned and unplanned change, and I'm going to go to the next point. Planned and unplanned change. What is the difference? Planned change and unplanned change. Okay, so you could always stop your video and think about the difference between the two. But let me go to the discussion point. So planned change tends to be systematic. It is not done in a haphazard way. It is done in an orderly manner. You see, so planned change essentially is done in a scientific manner. I hope that you can appreciate that. It's done in a scientific manner, while unplanned change is not done in a scientific manner. Planned change is proactive. To be proactive is to foresee the challenge, in part, before it becomes a reality. To foresee an impending problem before it becomes a reality. I think with the time we're living in now are quite different, and there is need for proactive managers in our time, because if we cannot see that there will be continuous depressed demand on services and goods in the near future because of lack of confidence in world markets, then there's a very big challenge. And so companies must, for companies to survive, one of the things they have to do is to minimize on their costs, and perhaps find other things that they can do to improve on themselves. All right, so we need to be proactive. Um, and on the other hand, unplanned change is not proactive, it is rather reactive. The opposite of not being proactive is to be reactive. You just simply react to the situation. Next, planned change is gradual. It is incremental. It takes place step by step, on a step-by-step basis. But unplanned change many times is sudden. And unfortunately, I think both changes will affect an organization. The next point says planned change can be initiated by management, but unplanned change is initiated by circumstances. Planned change, for instance, pulling out of a market that is not profit making, can be initiated by management. All right, but a sudden drop in sales, a sudden drop in revenue, is really initiated by circumstances such as COVID-19. I don't like mentioning that, but perhaps that's what we have now. We have got planned change. Again, the last point is under substantial management control, but unplanned change most of the times is out of the manager's control. I hope you can see the difference between planned change and unplanned change. I'd like to go to the next question, and says identify and explain the external factors that trigger change in the organization. In other words, do we have factors that are outside our control that can bring about change? And the answer is yes. And the answer is very much an emphatic yes. Think wide, and remember the acronym PASTEL. You have got 15 minutes. I'd like to ask that you do this work as an assignment again. Please, I hope that you had listened to the video up to this time. Remember the acronym PASTEL. Yeah, think about the external factors that would drive change. There's what we call political, economic, social, culture, technology, ecological, as well as legal. You must get back to me. This is an assignment. You explain PASTEL. You can always Google, and you'll be directed on what this particular acronym means. I'd like to go straight to the next question, parastatus. In Zambia, parastatal organizations play an important role in the delivery of goods and services to the general public, especially those markets that are not targeted by the private sector. By giving examples, explain in detail what parastatal organizations are. This is 9 marks. So we will close with that question, and again, I hope that you can come up with your own questions. The word para means close to. Examples of parastatism in Zambia, again, you've got ZNBC, ZESCO, ZISC, public corporations which are fully or partly government owned. That's what parastato means. It is actually a compromise between socialism and capitalism. A reflection here that yes, we can have institutions which provide employment to citizens, but those institutions must be profitable. And unfortunately, the mentality that was there in the old days was that you see, what belongs to the government does not belong to anyone. And so we see that in parastatals there is actually wastage. And many times parastatals are not sustainable. So you'll find that these companies end up failing without the necessary support from the government. What are the attributes of parastatals? Well, these are government controlled. In most cases, the government is the majority shareholder, so they're able to control these parastatals. And that very fact brings about what we call political interference in these institutions. And political interference is an enemy to growth, is an enemy to sustainability of such institution. Next, there is managed by the board. Again, the board put in place is put in place by the minister. In most cases, you hear the minister has got the authority to appoint or to dissolve the board. Again, that is again subject to political interference. It also leads us again to political interference, and unfortunately, many boards are simply rubber stamps. Next, these parastatals are financed by government through grants, borrowing, etc. Again, the very fact that parastatals are bailed out by government authorities may mean that these parastatals are not really independent. They will have to dance to the tune of the government of the day. Unfortunately, that leads to stunted growth. Parastatals are answerable to Parliament. I hope that you have heard of Public Accounts Committee and so on and so forth. I think that it is very important that government representatives or public officials hold the directors or the controlling officers in parastatals accountable, so that taxpayers' monies do not go to waste. So I'd like to thank you for listening to this video. Again, perhaps without having that environment where students can ask questions, these videos may seem to be short, but I hope that you can see that every time a point is raised, there is an aspect of going in detail, trying to explain, and of course your explanation and my explanations cannot be the same, but I hope that you can see the technique behind succeeding in management is to explain the questions that you are answering. Thank you very much.